Hi, Derek here, the Roaming Scholar, here to help you get through your exams. So today what we're going to talk about is coordinate geometry, the midpoint formula, distance formula, and slope formula. So I'm sure you are up to here with all the theorems, formulas, postulates, everything that you need to know for geometry. It's a little mind-blowing. But today I'm going to take at least two of those things away because the distance formula and the midpoint formula, you already know them, and I'm going to show you why. And when it comes to the slope formula, I'm going to give you just at least a few ways to make memorizing it a little bit easier. So here we go. Okay, let's start with slope. So let's pick two random points. We're going to say, 2, 3, and 5, 7. Okay, so what we want to do is find the slope between these 2 points, and we're going to just start with what you probably already know, which is your slope formula. So m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So the way I like to write this is delta y over delta x. That symbol, delta, means change, which means subtract, take the difference. It's just a little shorthand way of writing it. So from here, what do? We plug it in, right? Change in our y, 7 minus 3 over, change in our x, 5 minus 2. So what do we get? 4 over 3. There's our slope. Pretty basic. So when it comes to actually plugging the numbers in, I don't think any of you guys are having a problem with that. It just comes to memorizing the actual formula and also not confusing what goes on top and what goes on bottom. That's the biggest mistake I see people doing, change in x over the change in y. So here's 2 things to help you remember that. Number 1, think about speed. So we all know the unit for speed when we drive, 55 miles per hour. So miles per hour is the same thing as a distance, miles, over a time, hour. And what you can remember from this here is that time is always your independent variable. Okay, it doesn't depend on anything else. No matter what it is going to keep ticking no matter what you do. So that is our independent variable. So we know that independent is our x, so therefore if we know time is on the bottom, we know x is on the bottom. Second way is just knowing the difference between the independent and dependent variable. So y is your dependent variable, so y depends on x. So kind of the way I always thought about it is x holds up y, but if we try to do x over y, well, x cannot depend on y, so that won't work. So I hope those 2 little tricks help you remember what's going on there. All right, now let's talk distance formula. So, you all know probably the Pythagorean theorem. Drop my pen. What's the Pythagorean theorem? It's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So what I'm going to show you today is basically the distance formula is just the Pythagorean theorem, and where instead of writing c, we replace c with d for distance. And where a and b are, we're going to replace those with the change in our x and the change in our y. So let me show you. Here's our axes, x, y, and we're going to put 2 points down, there and there. So let's call this coordinate here 1, 1. And we'll call this coordinate up here 5, 4. So what we want to do is we want to find the distance between these 2 points, so we connect them like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a right triangle out of it. So if we take that down perpendicular and take this down with that, we make our right angle. So now that we have a triangle, if we're trying to find the distance, that side of our triangle, that's our hypotenuse, that's our C. So what we need to do is just figure out expressions for this side and for that side. So here we go. This side is this distance from here to here, which is just from here to here, right? So that's our change in our y. So I know I showed you before, delta y is my symbol, but that's y2 minus y1, or in this case, we're going from the y coordinate of 4 down to 1, or 1 to 4, so our distance is 3. Our change is 3. So now here on this side, it's our change in our x, because we're going from here, that point, to that point. So that's our change in our x, which in this case is, we're going from 1 to 5. So 5 minus 1 is distance of 4. Okay, so now we know we have a right triangle. So if you want, you could pull the picture out like this. You have 3 on that side, 4 on that side. Now we want to find the distance on that side. So what do? Distance squared, c squared, equals 3 squared plus 4 squared. So there's our a squared and our b squared. Okay, and how do we solve? If you want, you can take the square root right now, which is what we usually do with the distance formula. So the distance is equal to the square root of 3 squared plus 4 squared. So now if we just take these numbers here, and we go back to what we said up here, is that the distance then is equal to, all right, what was the 3? The 3 was the change in the y-coordinate. So we'll say we'll actually put it over here, because that's typically where it is. Change in y squared. That's our 3 squared. Now what about the 4? The 4 was our change in x squared. So we'll put that here. Change in x squared. And there's your distance formula, right there. Just rewritten in different terms. Okay? So when you have to find the distance, you don't have to memorize this formula. You can. It might make things a little bit faster. But for the most part, all you have to do is build a right triangle on the axes and do your Pythagorean theorem, and that's it. And you're done. All right. Good luck, guys. All right, now let's talk midpoint. Midpoint, probably one of the easiest ones, okay? Here's your midpoint formula. Midpoint is equal to x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. Okay, great formula, but do you have to memorize it? No, because you actually already know it. So here's an example. What's the average of 150? If those were, let's say, 2 test scores, what would be the average there? Most of you guys can even just do it without calculating, but if we wanted to calculate it, we would say, okay, 100 plus 50 divided by however many there are, 2. So we get 150 over 2, we get 75. So where's 75 in relationship to 150? It's right in the middle, right? It's the midpoint. So the midpoint is just taking an average. So now let's take another look at our formula here. And what do we see? We see an average of your x terms, right? We take our x's, we add them up, and we divide by 2, just like we did here with the 150. And what do we see here? Another average of our y's. We add up our y coordinates and we divide them by 2, and then we just write it in a coordinate. So you don't have to memorize this whole formula here. You can just separately take an average of your x's, take an average of your y's. Or at the very least, just knowing this is going to help you remember and organize this formula. So pretty simple. I hope you guys think the same thing. All right. See you next. So there you have it. The distance formula is just the Pythagorean theorem, and the midpoint formula is just taking an average. 2 things you already knew how to do. Now you don't have to memorize 2 extra formulas. I also hope that a couple tricks I showed you for memorizing the slope formula and keeping that straight help you out on your next test. And that's it for today. The Roaming Scholar, signing off.